Hi, it's Dr. Rod Story here in the Cross Politics studio. Glad to be talking medical. In fact, what we're talking about is Mirror Medical.
Mirror Medical.
Mirror Medical. Why Mirror? Well, Mirror kind of harkens back to, C.S. Lewis, who I think is quite a guy. He wrote a book called Mere Christianity that went to the basics of Christianity. Mirror medicine, because honestly, medicine's got a big head. We tend to think highly of ourselves. We kind of think of ourselves as the priests of this current generation, and that's a whole lot of hunk and foolishness. And I think it's maybe best to put medicine where it needs to be, which is first and foremost glorifying God, and second, recognizing that it has limitations and it's a human endeavor, limited by our ability to see and hear and touch and feel, and by time and space, which is so limited.
And it makes better sense that way too.
Well, there you go. I think it does. Yeah, when medicine doesn't aspire to be
a God itself,
a source of truth and everything, which it seems to be so often looked for, but falls flat, just like any handmade God.
That's facts. I'm looking at this article you have here.
Yeah.
This is crazy. Absolutely insane. Can I just read the title real quick?
Please do.
University of Washington sparks outcry for reportedly keeping aborted fetuses in paper bags.
Wow. This one is just not getting any airplay whatsoever.
It is now.
Which is really, I hope so. Here, we're going to send it out to the Fight, Laugh, Feast because our people pay attention and start making waves. But this is really important. I went to the University of Washington School of Medicine in Seattle, Washington. It's a marvelous medical school, excellent program for training doctors, one of the top 5 in the nation.
Wow.
Really thankful for it. But they have a deep secret, like a lot of the West Coast and East Coast schools. They've been studying and dismembering aborted babies and selling off their parts.
And this is okay.
Well, I wonder why it's not making news, but I think the Planned Parenthood sells baby parts hashtag seems to have worn itself out. And I'd like the Christians to kind of raise that one again.
This is insane. The University of Washington School of Medicine is reportedly keeping aborted human fetuses and organs in rows of labeled boxes and paper bags in a walk-in freezer.
Well, I think what it really points to is that people don't value life, and they see these discarded babies and they say, well, we might as well make some use of them. Seattle is one of the top biomedical research locations in the United States. In fact, if not the world, a lot of top-notch science is being done, but it's being done using tissues of aborted children. And the University of Washington seems to be one of the primary purveyors of these baby parts.
What are they expecting to learn? What are they testing?
Well,
so why do you need these fetuses, and what are you testing with these fetuses? What is
great question. And we raise this concern partly because we want to see humans treated as they should be in the image of God, and so it's one of the first reasons to oppose this. But what is medicine doing with these aborted fetuses? Well, they're making medicine in the first part. A lot of medications are being made now, including immune medications, treatments of cancer. Treatments of rheumatoid disease are being made using these tissues. And these tissues are used to make cell cultures. We talked a little bit about that when it came to COVID vaccine. You maybe heard the podcast and some of our video early on. And so that's partly what this whole machine is feeding, is this increased research in fetal tissues, which they're using to make medications. But of course, the end does not justify the means. You cannot take bad and produce good out of it. And we believe that this is an ethical wrong that should not be crossed.
I guess part of it for me, I'm thinking about as a doctor who is sworn an oath, right?
Yes, sir.
To do no harm. How do they then justify the ethics of this, knowing that that's an oath that they swore? And then if you can't trust your doctor to manage this type of ethical situation when it comes to other ones, how are you going to be able to trust them there?
Great question. I'm glad we're asking that question.
Yeah.
I think you should be. I think I'd like to segue from this concern and encourage our people to be wise as they're talking to their doctors and really asking, are these medications that you're suggesting that I take, are these sourced in embryonic stem cells? Embryonic stem cells is the buzzword for tissues that were taken from aborted children. And it is just a growing, ugly underbelly of the dragon.
So that's part of the questions that we need to be asking our
absolutely.
doctors.
Take this home and start doing some research, and then let's actually start being outraged at the things we should be outraged about. not just the ending of human life, particularly the most vulnerable, which should cause our leaders to tie a millstone around their neck and take a deep dive.
Ouch, ouch. But it doesn't end there. You start doing stuff like this, and you open up the door for all sorts of other unethical things as well, right?
Because what at the basis of it is really this sense that there are throwaway people, that there are people who we can say, you're just not convenient to my life right at this time, so I'll have that abortion, or perhaps I'm worried that you have some sort of genetic condition, and I would not want to be hampered by bringing you into this world. So
if you're a student there and and you're taking classes, how could you just say, I'm not doing this, and we're not doing any testing on fetuses?
Great question. The University of Washington is actually one of the largest medical complexes in the United States, and even though I was there 20 years ago, the things that happen at one end of the hall probably are not known at the other end of the hall. It is hard to divine out where this type of research and where this type of use of human beings has kind of wound its way into. Pray for your medical students and pray for those that are considering going to medicine. Pray for your doctors, because walking wisely in this broken world is really challenging.
Dr. Stewart, whenever you want to turn to this, fine. I just have one more question I have to ask, because I don't think, when we think about ending abortion, we think about one particular area to focus in. We're like, if we can get somebody elected, we can get the laws changed. We always think about ending abortion in a political sense. But there's also a way that if we look at where we see these other industries that are driving, this can't just be happening in the shadow, right? This has to be driving the form of abortion. So you got David Dalladin, right? That whole situation there where they're selling body parts. Right?
Man, that guy did an amazing work, and that's how the University of Washington information came out. Was an anti-abortion protest who followed the legal trail, and they discovered invoices for baby body parts, and they followed it backwards to the delivery van, and they figured out where that was coming from, and then they found their way even to the freezer to look in the window and see baby parts, bag, little a, baby parts, bag, 964. It's an endless supply of throwaway people.
But it's not just one thing. You can be involved in more than one area. And like you said, like David Dalladin did, these other people who did this work here, they also said, hey, let's just stop. Let's just stop trying to move our society to demand these type of what we incentivize. So we're incentivizing in one sense, and then we're getting it delivered in the other. So we can stop from both ends, right? We don't have to.
We can absolutely stop from both ends, and I think part of it can come from a consumer standpoint.
Right.
There was a infamous, and go ahead, Google it, you'll find it. Infamous flavoring of Pepsi products with stem cells that were taken from aborted fetuses. This is about 15 years ago now.
I'm sorry, what?
Yes, crazy enough. And actually,
I remember you telling me that flavoring, right?
And there's a number of industries now, whether it's cosmetics or chemicals, we seem to have found that using baby tissues to make all sorts of chemicals turns into a neat little parlor trick, and nobody seems to worry about it. But I would pull us back. Why are we not still outraged by this? A lot of Facebook. 5 years ago when David Dalladin brought out that information, I saw all of my Christian friends all over the United States starting to put those hashtag Planned Parenthood sells baby parts. And it hit the fan, and people were outraged. And you saw some of the abortion mills kind of heading for the hills, and you had all these medical centers saying, well, we don't do that, or actually backpedaling. And now it's still happening. How did this continue on? Even there was moves to make it illegal. The United States Senate, and it just never went anywhere.
Never went anywhere.
We just do not value human life, and it comes all the way down to our own bedrooms.
One of the I don't want to step on that because that's very important. It comes all the way down to our bedrooms. That's really. What do you mean by that, Doc?
Well, what I mean by that is honestly, a lot of abortion conversations happen in very private quarters, and that's one of the things I want to turn to as we talk about how do we end up with this decision. So here's one question I'm going to turn to you, and then I'm going to use that to play the stage. Abortions.
Yeah.
Women are choosing abortions, hopefully not under duress, but that certainly is an issue. When women choose an abortion, how often do you think it turns out to be a medical issue with the baby?
Oh, probably maybe 0.1%, maybe 0.3%.
Yeah, actually, the data on birth defects is actually very, very low.
Yeah.
It's less than 0.5%.
Okay, I was
total
close.
births. Yeah, it's very, very low. And yet, 1 out of 20 abortions is done in this country for a fear or a concern for the health of the baby. So there's a significant disparity between the actual number of birth defects.
Except for the health of the baby.
For the health of the baby. Yeah, exactly. How crazy is that?
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, your health is not so good. We're gonna
kill you.
We're gonna kill you.
There we go.
Oh, it's a dastardly world that we
Wow,
live in
for the
sometimes.
health of the baby.
Yeah, for the health of the baby. And what I think is actually driving this is something else that was also reported in the news this last couple of weeks, which is that a lot of prenatal testing or testing before a baby is born that's now on the market is patently a mess. It creates all sorts of false understandings of what the results are going to be.
Well, why would we do prenatal testing?
Well, some of it just comes out to be fear.
Okay.
So you think, man, I want to have a perfect little youngster. I want to make sure that we and perhaps it's kind of thought about in vigilance that I just want to make sure I'm ready for anything that comes along. And so you think, well, let's go ahead and do this testing. 23andMe or all sorts of other companies out there offer this blood testing for mom. Mom goes and she gets this testing done. She thinks, I'm just doing due diligence. I'm going to make sure that if my baby has any of these really scary disorders, that we're just ready for it. And then she gets this report in the mail. She spends $59 to get this testing, and she gets this report in the mail that says, we think that there's a high chance that your baby has this X genetic syndrome. Well, what do you think that those moms do with that information?
Yeah, they probably say, well, what's my options?
Yeah, they start going, man, I can't have a baby who has that.
Mm-hmm.
That would end my life. Oh, and then they start thinking, perhaps that baby, really, that would be suffering to bring that child into the world. We should avoid that at all cost. And what does that mean? What is that unsaid decision that's being made there? It really is abortion. We're talking about abortion. Yeah.
Talking about in the life of a child.
What's fascinating, and I would point you to the New York Times. They have a fascinating article from April 30th of this year that said that about 85 out of 100 times that those tests are wrong.
Oh, now that's not what's told to you after you get the test. You pay $60
No, of course, all you
for
see
it.
is this report that says in black ink that it's likely your baby has this horrific genetic syndrome, and there's no way that they're going to be born healthy, and they're going to be expensive, and they're going to require lots of time, and they might not even make it through this pregnancy. And the big thoughts get twirling. So the circumstance is that these are tests that people can buy. They're very easy to find on the internet. If you just want to search genetic testing, prenatal testing, there's hundreds of companies, and they're mostly Silicon Valley based.
Oh, that shouldn't tell you anything at all.
Well, I mean, it's a for-profit company, and they're looking to meet a market demand. There would not be a demand for this if there weren't people looking for it and wanting to have this information.
I remember when my wife was pregnant. So in Atlanta, we would go and since we did our births at home. So there wasn't like a traditional place for us to go and see a sonogram because we didn't have a doctor. Sorry, Dr. Story, you weren't there.
No, it's all good. Sonograms are we do use them for some of that reason to be able to anticipate, is there any major medical issues that we need to know about baby?
Yeah.
Sometimes you see that baby has some signs of Down syndrome, and so knowing in advance that baby might need some heart support, or might need some extra help
at birth.
At birth. I know a family that their daughter had a missing part of her intestines. And so when she was born, they were ready to have surgery, and she has made a full recovery, and now she's 5 and doing very well. And that sonogram was helpful in anticipating that. That sonogram is often used, however, to also usher in an abortion.
That's right. And so that's exactly what was happening with us. And so also the testing to see, hey, do you want to know if your baby has any other symptoms? And so that was always pushed on. It always felt weird to me. There's not a lot of places where I feel like, okay, are you doing this because I'm black? Like there really isn't. But in those situations, I've always felt a little extra shove. Like you might want to know just in case, because you so many times me and my wife have been sitting there and they said, hey, you don't know what kind of baby you might have. And you might not want to have a pregnancy like this. And my wife is looking at them and we're looking at them like, and what's the options you want us to do?
Absolutely.
And
Well, that's the
they're so
unspoken
bold.
question.
Yeah.
Yeah, the unspoken question. What's crazy is how often those turn out to be so wrong. And that's what this New York Times article points out, is that these tests
Wow.
raise the specter of something that sounds very, very scary and yet is so incredibly rare. And why does it do this? Well, it's first off, there's a lot of problems with these tests. They're not validated. Validated is a medical term that we use to say there's an objective way that this test is measured against to make sure that it's not over-reporting or under-reporting the condition that we're looking for. The second is that these are screening tests, and people don't understand that we use a lot of screening tests. I'll give you an example, mammograms. You probably have heard that a lot of mammograms catch things that probably didn't turn out to be cancer.
Right.
Well, and that's the nature of screening tests, is that we do a lot of care, and we use those to try and catch those occasional bad things, but a lot of times they do bring some extra worry by bringing some false positive tests. And that really does tend to worry some people, and then the question is, was it really worth doing this test, or did it just really stir a whole pot of worry and concern?
Doc, how does a test that's 85% inaccurate become something that's used consistently? And
it's not necessarily in the medical world, but the medical world is dealing with the fallout. And then oftentimes the conversation is, well, do you want the advanced testing, or do you just want to take care of it? It's to use another euphemism that is often used in this world. Once that door is open to the Pandora's chest, the worries are there. And that's very concerning. I would also say that what's interesting is these tests are usually an add-on test. So I don't know if you've heard, but a lot of moms now are having genetic testing to see what the gender of their child is going to be, and you can actually find that out like 6-7 weeks along of the child.
Are you kidding me?
Yes, and they go get this blood test, thinking, isn't it great? I can start planning for whether I paint my nursery blue or whether I paint it pink or whatever you decide the color should be. And you get these tacked on tests that then have such a high rate of false positive.
Well, the way the culture has gone now, the way morality has gone now, I could see someone using something like that even. And it's not like it's not a great thing to know what the sex of your child is. That's beautiful.
No, it is beautiful.
But I see people using that same exact thing to say, well, I didn't want a boy.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't want a girl.
Well, and we know in the United States that is happening, but because it's not illegal to abort a child for their gender, it's not illegal to abort a child for just about any reason. You can pick it, whether it's inconvenience, but gender seems like it's such a more frightful thing to do. But we know in places like India and other places where the culture does not value boys or girls, or values one much more than the other, that sex-selected abortion is a thing. It's the main reason for abortion in many of those places.
Doc, is there anything about this particular setup with this testing that you see, okay, this is a problem now, but this is going to lead to something that we're not going to want as we continue to go down this particular road that bothers you as a doctor?
I think it's starts off with, first, what is the child's value? So we know that here we are speaking as Christians, and we're appalled that babies' body parts are being found in bags just across the state line here in Seattle, and we're appalled that people are making choices to abort children. Well, let's back up and say, what is it that we should be different as? Because that's one of the challenges as we walk through this world as faithful believers. We want to sample the hors d'oeuvre plate of culture and use all their tools, and yet somehow Christianize them and say, hey, this isn't bad if I do it. But like I said, it opens so much of the Pandora's box. So the first question is, why are we seeking after this testing? Is it really for the benefit of knowing what is coming down the way, and what would we do with the information? So if you were sitting in my office with your wife and you guys were asking these questions, here's what I would walk you through. First off, tell me about your understanding of this child. Do you see this child as something made in the image of God?
Yeah.
Because that, first and foremost, as a Christian, step back long before you know genetically what's going on with this child. Because honestly, there's data out now that they're using some of these tests to say what's the child's risk for having hearing impairment,
right?
Or what's the child's risk for maybe developing
nearsightedness
down the way. Yes, you can get testing for those in this genetic testing profiles, and perhaps even choose not to carry this child to term just because they need glasses at age 5. I mean, there's no end to this sense of, but as Christians, we see it so differently. You are made in the image of God. You are, as David says, fearfully and wonderfully made. He doesn't put a condition on that, as David is acknowledging this remarkable God that can see him when he's sleeping, that can see him when he's standing, that knows him afar. A beautiful Psalm 139, I encourage you to meditate on it. This personal God that knows us, knew us right from the moment of our conception, and we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And that's not conditioned on whether we have all the genes or whether we have all the parts in the right spot, but it's purely conditioned on the fact that we are made in God's image.
And all these articles, Doc, you're going to have these inside of the notes? Because I'm
Absolutely.
sure people would love to
Yeah, let's take a look at that. And I would encourage you to do that. We also, I think it's important, and I talk to people frequently about, are you absorbing the world's culture, or are you acting as a Christian? Are you thinking as a Christian? Because we also need to understand that there is brokenness in this world.
That's right.
Where does that brokenness come with? Well, I often say it's because we're this side of Eden and we're this side of heaven. And I'm using my hands to show this really finite time that we live in. We know that we're living in a broken world, and that will extend in some surprisingly rare circumstances to our children. Our children may have some problems when they're not yet born, but does that mean that, where did that come from? Did that come, and does it mean that their value has gone away? Quite not. The reality is that we can't sanitize our world through medical testing. We cannot avoid every hard or occurrence that might happen. We can't avoid any medical improbability. We cannot live forever based on medical technology, and we certainly can't do that for our children. And so we have to be very careful. What is it that we are asking for or hoping for when we come to these conversations about this testing?
Also, too, when God gives you a blessing, you don't say no, Lord.
Yeah.
that's when, and you take that blessing, you be thankful for that blessing, and then you be sanctified by that blessing at the same time. And kids, regardless of how we look at their blessing.
Oh, David, thank you for saying that. I love that one of the ways that the pro-life world is talking back to this, talking back to this giant lie about what children are worth, is by showing these children that are born with these unique circumstances and showing that they live, that they are loved, that they bring joy, that blessing and serving them is one of the best ways for us to grow in Christ's likeness, and that is ultimately what we're called to become. We would miss out on so much of this if we tried to sanitize the world, and I don't use that lightly. If we tried to sanitize the world of all medical misfortune, if we tried to keep all the handicap away, we would become something less than what we should be. And ultimately, as believers, we know, again, that coming soon.
That's right.
In this very short timeline of history, we're at about 5,500 years of human history. It's just a blink of an eye. That at the very end of it, well, let me read it out of Romans 11,
please do.
Revelation, as we kind of think through. Christ says this: He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death will be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, or pain anymore, for the former things will be passed away. We know as Christians, and this is ultimately where we know that the hard and the good things that both come from the hand of our loving Savior find their finality, and that's in the end of and the glorious reunion at the Feast of the Lamb.
That's good, Doc.
Hey, let's keep talking about these hard things in our world and how to think wisely and differently as Christians. Thank goodness for the Holy Spirit.